I'm Dr. Mark Sue, and welcome to the Functional Medicine Reality Podcast. Join me and our community weekly as we bring you unfiltered health from inflammation to longevity. Real stories, real people, real solutions. Experience real-life health changes from both patients and practitioners, and learn how to turn cutting-edge information into real results in your own life so you can feel better, live longer, live healthier, and be confident and clear in your healthcare choices. Let's get real and get results. Hi, everyone. Welcome again to the Functional Medicine Reality Podcast. Today is our first session in a recurring cycle where I'm more than honored in part one to introduce everybody to Mike Schrantz. Mike is an IEP, indoor environmental professional, and he is, as we like to say, or I like to say, so we've got in the house today, no pun intended, we've got a doctor of houses in Mike and a doctor of people in myself. And so this is in our kids' language these days, Mike, it's a collab, right?
Oh, is that what they say nowadays? Okay.
I might be outdated. So if I'm already outdated, I'm sorry. I'm
learning. I got a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah, that might have been a cringe moment, but I'm pretty sure they're still using the word collab. So it's like doctor of houses, ex doctor of people. So that's what we're doing here, right?
Yeah. That's right, brah. That's what I'm hearing a lot at my house.
Oh man, we're going to date ourselves anymore. If we get into language down the road, somebody's watching this recording, they'll be like, oh, that is so old. Maybe we'll throw in a couple here and there, but we'll have to be selective. Yeah. So Mike and I, we came up with this plan and idea because we've known each other for, what do you say, Mike? Maybe 5, is it? I don't think it's been 6, maybe 5 years.
Yeah, that feels about right. Maybe back in the inaugural 2019 ICI thing or just after that, something like that.
Yeah. You were on the board already. I came on the board there. So the International Society of Environmentally Acquired Illness, ISEAI.org. Mike was a charter member, a key individual and key presence to the organization at the start, from my perspective anyway. And I know I'm not alone. One of those people that I was like, when I was somehow, I don't know why, still invited to be on the board, I was a little intimidated. I probably never told that to you.
No, that's the first time, and how ironic. It was a mutual feeling.
Oh, really? No, because everybody else there has got presences and branding and identity on this stuff. And so, yeah, but you were always really easy to, very approachable, like just magnetic, charismatic, as everyone else knows, and people on here will get to know. But yeah, you've always been really easy to chat with, and we've had a lot of real meaningful personal and professional conversations over the years. What we're looking to bring to the table going forward on a recurring cyclical rotational basis in the Functional Medicine Reality Podcast is an opportunity where Mike and I are going to chat, not always, but very focusedly and predominantly on the topic of mold illness, where he's a doctor of houses, we are doctor of people. And it's an opportunity where the IEP and the human clinician are going to chat about that topic in particular in context of how do we think these things through, coming at that problem from both ends of the spectrum for any given patient or a spectrum of patients. So we're on the board together with this organization. We have had many conversations professionally on how we interact and help patients/clients get better faster, and how we navigate those decisions and complexities and challenges with the healthcare topic when it pertains to mold exposures in homes, businesses, et cetera. So with that being said, Mike, let me let you do a self-intro, because I wouldn't do it justice with your credentials and your background, professional experiences, et cetera.
Sure. I'll take people on a quick ride here. I started with indoor air quality when I was 16 years old, working with a family-owned business for air conditioning. So I wasn't doing the work I'm doing today, but I was learning about the fundamentals of building science, airflow, pressure differentials, basically how things can move from one location in a home to another. I evolved, graduated high school, went through college, actually got my degree originally in operations management at the business school at the University of Arizona, Eller College. And while I was doing that, I acquired some entry-level, eventually upper-end accredited certifications, which means something in our industry, requiring 8 years of experience and all this other stuff, board review, that really got me involved in the topic of indoor air quality. And what got me was, I remember my mentor, my great uncle who had passed away a number of years ago, we would go out to homes with complaints, because people may or may not know this, but whenever there's a odor or health complaint, a lot of people think it has something to do with the air conditioning system. So they would naturally call the air conditioning company up. And that led to my mentor creating an indoor air quality division, of which I was the mentor. We would go out and we would ultimately solve problems, answer questions that other people could not. And that was fascinating to me because I felt this sense of value of, wow, we're making a real difference. That led me into the work I do today, really got passionate. I was doing all sorts of work in sectors, commercial, industrial. I was working in hospitals, helping test out neurological operating rooms, like things like of that nature. And one day I met a doctor in 2014 who said, "Hey, seen one of your reports from one of my patients, and it looks like you really do a thorough job." Introduced me to what you and I call this community, this functional diagnostic naturopathic world of work dealing with patients who suffer from something that maybe conventional medicine might not address. Fell in love with it, got really deeply involved in that. And I'm over, fast forward, this is year 28 for me that I've been in the industry. I've been
Wow.
working with over 7,000 clients. It's been a privilege and very humbling. And that responsibility of where I'm at in my journey right now, Mark, is really just speaking the truth and giving context to things. Because on the flip side of all this is one of the issues is, of course, we're worried about exposure in homes and buildings, but there's so much overwhelm that I've really wanted to make it my focus in this chapter in my life, at least, to clear the air up, to, no pun intended, to really just provide some peace of mind and comfort that we don't live in a world surrounded by plutonium, but we also, it's that balance, right? It's that fulcrum of what's not taking it serious enough, but what's also being extreme.
Yeah, you comment on a couple of things that I just affirm what I love about you. So one is we come from a similar fabric of we love being of service and being of help to people, but it ultimately you touched on the word value, but just being of value to people and then seeing them benefit, right, to whatever we can do as bring to the table in service to humanity. And yeah, the integrity. I know something that you said. I'll just affirm also that a lot of what Mike and I share as values are authenticity and integrity. In some ways, I think we would agree that we're our own worst critics internally, each of us individually. We hold ourselves to high standards, sometimes arguably unnecessarily or too high of standards. We're no different than anybody else. We're human. We've got a human nature, whether you want to call it a human nature or a sin nature, whatever the case may be. We're no different than anybody else, right? We're not better than anybody else, but we hold ourselves to high standards and we want that of ourselves and we have expectation that is a benefit to our clients and patients.
Amen.
But yeah, and I think that you speak to part of a real focus point for us with these recurring sessions. Yeah, we're going to focus on clinical stuff, especially with the health related stuff, especially the mold illness topic, because that's an intersect of topic between the environment and the person, right? This is a really rare window of opportunity for people to see and experience how an IEP like yourself and a human clinician like myself, how we can collaborate and what those intersects are for the person with their specific health issues. But on a greater level, you and I are also really minded about the fact that you just said, there's so much information out there right now, and it's just going to magnify with AI and everything, right? Where I'm convicted, I shared this with you, that more and more our roles individually, collectively, as practitioners, whether the whole environment or the person, I really believe we're going to shift more into playing having greater value in the role of guiding and counseling people to clear and create clarity and clear the noise from all the extra stuff going on that we're all like, there's just complexity with all the information.
That's 95% of my clients that come to me. You're right. Two quick points is it's a relationship. How many people who have health issues or struggles deal with the concept of the health of my body and the health of the building? Those are two major pieces. And being able to see Mark and I hopefully today provide value and clarity on those things, because so many people come to me and we end up spending the first 30 minutes deconstructing thoughts that were concluded or felt or heard. And there is good information, but how do you sift through that? We still have polarization in our industry where some people would say, oh, absolutely. And we'll get into these topics another time, perhaps, but
Yeah.
fog the home, don't fog the home, and all these issues. So I'm really thankful, Mark, for this opportunity to give clarity to the audience and back it up with science and logic where we need to give those individuals who might be struggling or just dealing with this journey a clear path forward to that finish line of getting recovered and healing.
Yeah. No, yeah, I love that. I love that. We're doing this. I'll admit up front, just we talked before jumping on here, like how much we wanted to script this out or not script it out, but we're both a little bit of the, yeah, perfectionist mentality for both of us. Again, high expectations. Yeah, I might have preferred we inherently that we scripted out a little bit more, but we decided, yeah, you know what? We're pretty good. We feel the magic and from client and patient feedback and just internally that things go pretty well when we have a framework of things, but we're not going to over script this. So yeah, I like where this is going. And I think this is but we are focused, we are honing in on these are the values and the goals that we have underlying with this cyclical rotational piece of the podcast as a whole, where part of it is the health clinical part, but part of it also is the bigger picture of creating clarity within the noise and bring value in that regard, because you and I both see both practitioners and patients and practitioners who are patients themselves going in all kinds of directions. And it's not a judgy thing. We're not here to judge anybody at all, but we just want people to feel better faster, get better faster, and not spend unnecessary time down rabbit holes because they were persuaded or misunderstood or misperceived something they heard about, read about, whatever, or learned about through any avenue of social media, podcasting, or whatever else may be the case, and waste their time and have lost opportunity to just get better.
Yep. Saving time, money, and energy for the patient is my ultimate goal.
Yeah, for sure. So today, should we just shift in?
Do it. Let's get it raw.
All right. So today we're focusing on this topic of, we're just going to jump right into, now we're going to shift from high level to right into the weeds. All right. On one focal topic, just to start off with. We chose this topic just because it's something that you and I, Mike, we've talked about many times over many years. And there's a reason it's still a hot topic. And you said recently that it's even now, you said it's near and dear to your heart. It's forefront of your mind, even lately. For me, anytime there's a topic that runs the length of time, there's a reason for it. And so the topic here is, when it comes to unhealthy environments, a sick building, we could say a moldy building, whether it's a home, business place, workplace, or whatever. When it comes to a moldy or unhealthy environment, okay, so I'm going to say from a clinician's perspective, for me, when I was learning this stuff years ago, there was a teaching, there's a school of thought, community of practitioners or IEPs or collectively, whereby you got to get out of the moldy environment, right? If you want to get better, you got to get out of the mold. That's like pretty much the common phrase, the common thing. Yep. And the evolution, so I'm just going to set the stage and say, this is the premise. And then we're going to talk here, I'm going to throw it back to you as to where are we at now in the shades of gray. If we start off with a more black and white paradigm, binary paradigm of saying, you got to get out of the mold environment, right? The term that we've heard many times is you need to be in a mold-free home or mold-free workplace or mold-free environment, et cetera. So,
yeah.
And that black and white paradigm has, in my perspective, I'm pretty sure I know you would agree too, to whatever degree, it has become less black and white, it's become more gray. So here's the first question. Here's this. So what do you think are the origins for that more aggressive binary stance, if you will, that position on needing to really achieve that highest standard of cleanliness, to say it's got to be mold free? Do you have any thoughts? I don't know that I have a thought, because you've been around that, especially obviously on the environmental side. You were in this world before I was. Where do you have any thoughts on where the origins of that came from, and how much of those principles' origins are still valid, or what do you still cling on to now as still valid, but even if it's a little more gray than it was?
Your point about it being black and white, where it started, mold's always been around, right? It's been here before we were here, arguably, depending on what your belief system is and other things. But what we noticed was an extremeness. I've joked, you've heard me say this before, back in the 50s and 60s, grandpa would just say, quit being a sissy, suck it up and deal with the moldy basement, or let's just put some bleach on it because if it's dead, it's not an issue. And there was a portion of the community that was like, wait a second, that the person's still sick, they're not getting better. And we didn't have terms like CIRS or biotoxin illness or other things like that to describe it decades ago. But there was this movement, and the movement was healthy. Majority of the movement, in my opinion, was healthy. The idea of saying, no, it was more than just spraying bleach on it or saying it's old. It is mold there, but it's been there for 15 years. we got away from that and we educated through science, through research that dead or alive mold can still be an issue, an exposure issue. And that's all great. I think, and again, we all have our bias. And I try to really, to Mark's point earlier about us trying to be authentic and be able to provide a source of trust and balance and reliability in our words, is that like many things in life, we went too far. And when I say we, I'm not necessarily referring to Mark and I, although I'm sure I've had my moments of flaw, is that now it was like we would use terms to, like, mold free was huge, is still huge. And it especially was a trigger. This idea of people aren't getting it. We're hiring mold remediation companies to come in to remediate something, and they're still leaving mold here. So we're just going to lay it down and say mold free. And again, the concept of mold free was fine, except people didn't always understand what that meant. And they thought literally mold free. Am I talking about the mold that's on the drywall that you should leave it there? No, you get rid of that. And we'll dive into these sub details later as the topics present themselves. But what was happening is that people would then test their homes for mold, no matter what the method of testing was, and it would come back with normal backgrounds. See, we live on Earth, right? And so we're breathing in, as we're speaking, mold spores, mold fragments, mycotoxins from the outside. And what I mean to say to you is that we're going to have a little bit of background mold. It's not going to be, by some people's definitions, mold free. And so moving forward, I think what happened is in the grays, we started to see a trending in the last, I'm going to say in the last 10 years. You could argue either side of that number, but we started to see an aggressive nature. We had some of the pioneering doctors in the world, one of them, which is here in Arizona. Love this individual. But one of the things that always got me is he would tell clients, if you found any count of Stachy, kind of the Tom Cruise celebrity mold, everyone may know Stachybotrys or know it by it being black toxic, that if you found any amount in the home, it meant you had a problem and you quote unquote had to get out of that moldy home. Two things real quick on that. First of all, that triggered many people, the limbic system, other things that came up where they were starting to freak out, because what they didn't realize is that, yeah, that one Stachybotrys spore that you found in any kind of mold sample did show up, but maybe that's background. It's normal, and the normal background from the outdoors and nothing that you have to worry about. Our community today seems to be, when I say our, portions of our community seem to be extreme. There's like this blind momentum to teach people, to educate people. This is the healthy side of the community. There's people that do things for more nefarious reasons. Mold is gold is a term. But in the healthy side, do it to the extremeness where it's not reflecting an outcome that you can achieve in your home because you live on Earth. And so as I'll land the airplane here, is where I'm seeing it now is people going too far. We're having people, when it comes to contents, throw everything away without any context. Just one comment. People that are selling their homes because of one sample without understanding how to interpret it. People going bankrupt, getting divorced. And that I have an issue with, because that is not a science-backed led decision in many of the cases I deal with. It's fear-based.
Yeah. So I'm gonna provide a little context as I've talked before jumping on here, just awareness that we don't know who's listening in here per se. So for those of us who are listening in on this, or are practitioners or whatever, who are unfortunately familiar to too familiar veterans, I like to call it, of this topic of mold illness. All right. If you know the term CIRS, if you know the term mycotoxins, even, yeah, likely you've been around it, and we feel for you, because you're a person who we can predict is suffering quite a lot. You've got a lot of symptomatology, chronic this, chronic that, could be numbness, tingling, could be brain fog, fatigue. You and I could come up with a list of 30 items long within 30 seconds, right? Pain, disability, all kinds of stuff. And it can get really extreme. And then we got people who probably there's probably some people listening here also who they don't really have as much background on what we're talking about. So just a couple bullet points would be, number one, yeah, there is legitimacy. We won't go into detail here today, certainly, but there's legitimacy to sick buildings causing people health issues, right? There, in conventional medicine, there is officially that term called a sick building syndrome. You know it better than I do. It's a legal term as well. In fact, it's mostly in the occupational health arena within the clinician side. It's not something that primary care people deal with. They're going to refer someone out. I don't even know how you'd really refer to. I just know it's in the occupational health arena. Sometimes you have to find somebody in a hospital setting, or you work for a big enough company, then someone in HR who can point you in that direction. Nonetheless, it's not all non-conventional medicine. Certainly, it's not like alternative medicine or woo-woo or whatever. Okay, so it's a thing. Some people are sick from the sick building, and then it's a variable. There's variability as to how sick people can get for a lot of reasons we won't get into today. And then there's also variability as to what consists of that sickness of the building, and therefore how the person might respond to it. And yes, I've met too many people, too many families where somebody's sick, someone else is not. And commonly for you and I, again, for another time, why is it more common that women are more symptomatic than men or have chronic complexity of illness more often than men? We can point to conventional medicine. We know factually that autoimmunity is much greater in females than males as well, physiological, females versus male. Part of it is the hormonal piece. We won't get into all that, but there's legitimacy to all of this. It just may not be mainstream and real common familiar to everybody. But with that being said, I'm just highlighting what you commented on is that, yeah, the extremes, right? Whether personal life, professional life with what you and I do, political life, just across the board, it feels like the world is moving towards more polar extremes, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to be in the gray in the middle.
Yeah, it feels like politics. And just as a quick 30-second insert into where you're going or where I think you're going is that I have CIRS. And that means I have a susceptibility to exposure to certain things, including environmental, like mold. And this is not, in case it's needed for some of those that are listening, this is not a plight of it's all in your head. If you go on my own podcast, you'll see it's quite the opposite. It's about being a cheerleader for the balance, because we have too many cheerleaders that balance the idea, the push of mold's a concern. We get that. There's natural healthy. I work with people that are having mold exposures on a regular basis who have very legitimate issues. I'm talking to the subset of people that maybe can resonate with the idea of this just feels too much, or they lack understanding and clarity that might help them justify remediating or cleaning something more. So it's speaking to that population, because there's no doubt that sick building syndrome was coined in the commercial sectors when people were getting sick in offices and they couldn't figure it out. So they couldn't say it's due to mold. They say something in the building making them sick. It's a syndrome and that sort of thing. And that does stick for those individuals. These are the individuals that I'm focusing on right now, are the ones that find themselves getting a little bit of analysis paralysis, a little bit of overwhelm, but happy to acknowledge the other folks as well.
Yeah. And stemming off of that, I'm thinking back to the comment you made where some of that context is that you and I both know that people who are sicker are understandably more desperate, especially, and then if they've been really sick for a longer period of time, they have waves of desperation, if you will, because who doesn't want to feel better, right?
Yep.
That's natural and understandable. So unfortunately, we'd like to believe it's not the case, but it is, and we can flesh this out on a lot of different levels over the future podcasts and otherwise. But yeah, whether on the clinician side or the environmental inspection and or remediation side, there can be more extreme responses by the practitioners on either side of the equation, and recommendations made that may not be. So for me, just saying it may not be completely wrong in a recommendation, but it's exaggerated and unnecessary. And there's a bias of revenue generation, right? It's a business thing. So you comment on the mold is gold phrase. And if I recall, that's the sort of remediator world where that gets
It
around
is.
a lot.
Yeah, exactly. It used to be asbestos, and now the focus is mold as a good way to make a lot of money. Not to say that every company out there leads with the dollar sign, worships the money, but that is an issue, and it's an elephant in the room that comes up.
Yeah. And so I think back to when we started this at the very beginning of this session where you said, yeah, trust that's something that you and I hold as a very high commodity. We expect that of ourselves. We expect to keep ourselves accountable first, and then check ourselves, and then also present with a trustworthiness, because I don't know, I would say the Visa commercial, that's priceless. We may not always be right.
No,
There may not be a right and wrong every time, but
even when you're talking, like, because we're trying to be so fair and recognize the different subsets of what a person might be either practicing or experiencing. Listen, we know clinicians that are spot on. Yeah, you're right. That look like they're having mold exposure. And thank you so much for bringing that to the IEP's attention. Let's see what we can do to help these folks out. There's also what we've noticed are trends of some clinicians who are learning. They have good intentions, but they don't really know, and they blame the house on the lack of the patient's recovery when maybe the modality of treatment might not have been the appropriate thing. All this to say, it's yet one more thing, because when I was a kid, when my doctor told me I was healthy or had an issue, I believed that doctor. And so there's that issue of influence. But again, a lot of things that in the weeds that we're going to sort through.
So let me just jump into you. I alluded to earlier to that you said, hey, this is still a forefront of my mind issue just of late. So let me just throw out, why don't you give us a couple examples of, let me think. Yeah. Can you give us some real life examples? We're not trying to throw other people on the bus, right? We're going to work through this dynamic of, we're not here to cast judgment or throw shade at people. At the same time, our priority and advocacy is first and foremost to the client/patients. And if that means that some people are going to get upset or take us the wrong way or whatever, who are colleagues, it's not our intention, but we're looking out for the patients and clients first and foremost.
Number one.
So you've said several times, it's been more than a year even, and again, I'm sure this is still going on. So you update me and tell us right now. You and I both know, and it's not necessarily with bad intention, as you just alluded to, that there are practitioners who, of whatever scope of practice, okay, all kinds of different kinds of practitioners who might or have outright said to someone, you just tested abnormal in this regard to that regard. Sometimes it's a very simple focal one test, might be it's a collection of tests. You need to move now. You've given me that example. You just alluded to it. Can you give us just a few examples of the spectrum of experiences you have as a inspector, where you have a client come to you or refer to you or whatever the case may be, you connect with them, perhaps you don't know the practitioner, et cetera, but you're having to, as you say, deconstruct and walk people back, because there's going to be some people, as you said, who they're so desperate, or as we talked about, they're so desperate. They've read about stuff, they've heard stuff online, podcasts, blogs, whatever else, and they believe that to heart. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I'm living in a coffin, I'm going to die, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. Yes.
And then you got other people who, no doubt, especially when it's in the same family, and they're like, hey, how can you be that sick? I feel fine. Like, how could it be that there's no way our home's that bad, or if bad at all, this is bull crap, because I feel fine. This is in your head.
And I've heard stronger words, but very true.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Why don't you give us a couple examples of what you deal with, where the bottom line is you're having to deconstruct, and it's painting the picture of the binary paradigm of, you got to move now, you got to throw all your stuff away, and why it's still an issue now, even after all these years.
Sure. Whew. The one that speaks to me the most, and again, I feel free to insert qualifiers as needed, Mark, but is the topic of, let's just set the stage. We'll do it in bullet point. Patient's feeling sick. Patient goes to doctor, does initial writes up, and then have them do some sort of a test, like, for example, a urinary mycotoxin test. There's different viewpoints on the use and value of the urinary mycotoxins. I think that I've seen actually some good use with trending data, but I also have seen, in my opinion, observation and listening to other clinicians who do it or understand it, that it can be misused and abused. And the example would be,
and just real quick, I'm going to qualify for people who aren't familiar with it.
Thank you.
This is not a lab that is conventionally available.
Yeah.
So this is a specialty lab, and you and I are familiar with this. This is a very hot topic among our communities, whether IEPs or human practitioners. But briefly said, this is a urine testing for fungal toxins, or mycotoxins is the term.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of debate around it. We're not going to get into it, but it's not available by your conventional practitioners.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Absolutely true. So you go to the specialist, they do the analysis, or have you do the sample, and then they get the results back, and the lab comes back with results that indicate that you're elevated. You have more than what the lab, and maybe the opinion of the clinician, feels is elevated, more than normal, more than background levels that you would normally have through, say, dieting, or rather food that you eat that might have background levels, normal, environmental, and drum roll, possibly from exposure to the building that has mold in it, producing mycotoxins. They take that single data point, and maybe with a few other things, they're feeling fatigued and they're feeling brain fog, and they'll tell the client, you have a major mold problem, you have a significant one, and until you get out of that moldy situation, you won't recover.
Yeah.
And right there is enough to paralyze a majority of the people that I work with. Maybe it's biased, but I like to think that I'm open-minded to the concept that it makes sense. That would be paralyzing, because they didn't tell you that you won the lottery. They're implying that your home, which is a major investment, it's where your roots of your family are for many people. It's where you grew up. It's where your kids go to school, that it's a problem. And nothing about that seems like it's, okay, take one button or apply one chemical in my house, which we don't recommend holistically, but we can get into that another time, and that it'll be better. It's much more complicated. So then what happens is they're feeling overwhelmed because
Yeah.
their clinician told them in the way that I said or something similar that they have this problem. It's very factual based. It felt black and white. And then they'll either do some sort of do it yourself mold testing or hire a professional, an IEP, to come in and do it. And there's different sorts of examples, but I'm going to pick one that's very convenient. We can elaborate from there, Mark, is they'll do some initial DIY sampling because maybe the disgruntled husband thinks this is all foo-foo, and the results will come back with mold on it, not knowing that might be normal background. They'll then start to become more worried and then start getting into the topics of, do I have to throw away my contents? We only have so much money. What if we
So
do
snowball
find a
effect, right?
It's a snowball effect.
And they're reading stuff online, and no judgment, but they're reading and learning stuff online along the way to reinforce those thoughts.
The biggest issue that I had personally along this same topic is that when I was diagnosed, I did a gene test that looked at gene expression, and the most upregulated gene that they looked at was a gene that they associate with PTSD. And you'd think somebody like me would be so well prepared and have many resources, which is true. But unfortunately, a lot of those resources are some of the kinds of examples we're offering today. Longer story shorter, yeah, it's snowball effects. And then their mind goes crazy. And then they go, God, I'm going to do my own research. God help you if you're a Google expert. Because when you go online, you can find the worst of any scenario. Look up what causes headaches. It could just be you're dehydrated, or it could be you have a brain tumor. And I remember my experience, and I've heard the experiences of thousands of people, and it's very much in alignment with, yeah, my mind went to the worry of the brain tumor as one example of 1,000 of anything, or mold, like, oh, you can't replace things, which is a subtopic of what we're going to be hitting on today. So that is a classic example where I think that the industry is doing it wrong. We're lacking context where what's going to lead this evolution is not us. It's going to be the patients, because more and more patients are asking questions that 10 years ago, they didn't even know how to ask. They just assumed it. But nonetheless, there still is a general trend of this extremeness. And I could go on with that example, Mark, about what that continues to snowball to look like. But usually what it ends up being is a defeated patient, somebody who feels overwhelmed that there's no way out. And I'm not a doctor, but I listen and learn from a lot, including yourself. And what I have learned is that stress on your body, at times, I wonder, Mark, if has more negative effects to your overall health than the diagnosis the susceptibility itself.
Yeah. And I was just also thinking, connecting to a previous talking point we just had, was I got to imagine that if a patient has a strong relationship and trust in whatever practitioner it is, when that practitioner says something like you just threw out, like, you've got mold, you've got to move now, that patient's, that impression is going to be much deeper and more sustaining than if I don't really give credibility as a patient to that practitioner.
Yeah.
So and unfortunately, it's just a comment of mindfulness for us that for those of us as practitioners, us or our colleagues, et cetera, who value trust, we have to be even more mindful about what we are saying to people and keeping ourselves in check. If we're that convicted, hey, we're that convicted. We wouldn't propose like you hold back or whatnot. But if we're not totally sure, we got to be careful about the extreme comments that we might make.
Yeah. We've seen two scenarios too, where one scenario along those same lines is a lot of the clinicians that I've listened to, and I have the privilege of being in positions where I have access to this type of conversation, is that they're putting a lot of weight and trust in the lab's analysis and interpretation itself. And again, we can save it for another topic, but there's questions about the validity of the sampling. Not to say that there's no validity, please don't hear me saying that, but just to say that, is it so much that clinician can provide that level of confidence that you do have a major problem when we see a lot of issues? The other issue too, just real quick, is there might be some people listening right now, Mark, where they're like, okay, yeah, I feel you. I've been getting this little bit of overwhelm, was diagnosed with this, or had this marker that was collected, this measurement of my body, whether it was urine or something else. And then they hire an IEP, and then the IEP comes out, and this is really a challenging situation for the patients and the clinicians, is that there's those folks that the IEPs that play doctor. They'll make comments about what they're finding. And I'm talking about a specific subset right now. Not every IEP is like this, but there's a certain subset that they'll make it sound horrible. It's like, how can you say that with the information that you've collected? We know of people, for example, that are asking clients to tear down all of their exterior walls because of an experience that they had, and they're making assumptions. And if it
Sorry,
costs,
just to clarify, you're
yeah,
saying you're bringing up examples where an IEP is talking about test results that they conducted on an environment, and then you're saying sometimes it's carried out a little
yeah,
far.
the snowball effect continues. And I'll say, and in addition to what you just clarified, because that's correct, is they'll also comment on the clinical stuff. They'll say,
That's what I was trying to. That's why I just wanted to delineate what you're talking about there. But okay, it goes
yeah,
both ways.
yeah. So it goes both ways. And so it's just, I guess you said it best. It's the snowball effect. It's like all this momentum creates, and you know me with analogies, creates this mold monster. It creates this thing that may very well be bigger than what you're actually dealing with, to a point that is significant. It's not tomatoes. It's the difference between you may have an issue or you may not have an issue, or a subset of that would be you have a major issue when really you had an issue that needed to be addressed so you could help recover better and quicker, but not as bad as you nearly thought it was.
Yeah, as I'm just listening to what we're talking about here, and I'm putting myself in the shoe of someone who's doesn't know or doesn't have the experiences that we have, especially as a patient, but perhaps as a practitioner too. So we start out by saying, hey, look, mold illness and health challenges resulting from a sick building of whatever sort is legit. Okay, we agree to that. That's a premise. That's not questionable. There could be variability as to how much, who gets affected, but health issues from a sick building is legit. Then we say, okay, breaking down the black and white, okay, it doesn't mean it's the end game, or it's like you're destined for X, Y, and Z, or that you have to have a completely mold-free environment or you're doomed. So now we're saying it's not that black and white. There's a lot of gray in between. And then we just threw out that, oh, some of the variables on the grays, what makes it shades of gray is who's providing the information, right? Is it someone out of scope of practice? Is it out of line? We'll dare say, okay, again, we're not judging people, but that's legit to say. I'm not gonna talk about what's a good or better decision for cancer treatments. That's out of my wheelhouse. All right. So whether it's a practitioner of a human practitioner making too much comment about a home environment, or an IEP making perhaps too much comment about the human test results, we as practitioners, it's all, I think you and I would agree, we would put down a gauntlet to say a call to action to us as colleagues and our colleagues is, let's tighten up where we've gotten loose on being out of our lanes.
Yeah, let it be a sound,
landlord.
right. Let it be a sound bite in case we have to refer to it again for those that don't hear what we're trying to say. Mold exposure, moldy buildings is a legitimate thing. I know firsthand what that's like. I moved into a house that had 4 different remediation areas that we had to deal with. It's not that. There's plenty of cheerleaders, people who voice and talk and support that concern, me being one of them. What we don't see is what we're talking about. Oh, sure, there's people out there that do it. We know of a few colleagues that are in the same line of general thinking that we both have, but it's that call to action of saying, hey, the community is evolving. We are evolving in what we know and don't know about certain modalities of assessing a home, of assessing the body, determining what might be going on to a certain level, and that you, the individual, the professional, the clinician, are making claims that are not in alignment with that, and that you need to check yourself. And because I guarantee you, there's at least one person listening that has had that experience, and more than likely, it's a majority of people who've gone through this.
Yeah. Yeah. And then secondly, just taking off from there, secondly, as a patient, we're perhaps advocating that just be aware that there are a lot of variables in the equation that eventually distill into a recommendation for X, Y, and Z. And if, as a patient, no matter if you're familiar with this or you're not, if a recommendation is being proposed without mindfulness, and I know that's subjective, right? But without taking into account enough factors,
Something feels off.
it's
Yeah.
too rush, right?
Yeah.
We could say that.
Yeah.
If a recommendation is being made, whether it's by a human practitioner or a building practitioner,
Or ChatGPT, been getting a few of those lately, by the way.
or ChatGPT, there you go. Yeah, that's great. Thanks for throwing that in there. Or AI, ChatGPT, whatever it is. If a conclusion is being made seemingly too, the word I'm looking for? Not urgently, but rashly, abruptly, that's worth stepping back and disallowing ourselves, keeping ourselves, limiting ourselves from attaching emotionally and mentally too strongly to that, because those first impressions can be hard to undo.
Yeah.
I think that's what you refer to that.
Yeah. So it's spot on. Spot on. It's just about, and it's not about going to your clinician on your follow-up visit and going, listen here, clinician, I got some words for you. It's about being mindful yourself that for the different audiences, right? For the patient, that's who I'm talking to right now. It's being open-minded. And also, as you're learning, as you'll learn more through this podcast, is getting proper education and questions that you might consider asking to help reinforce or raise the level of confidence that what the call to action is that the clinician is making to you makes sense. It checks out. But I'll just clarify one of 1,000 things. Unless you are an outlier to the curve of what we normally see, most homes are not a burn it down. Most homes are not a throw all your contents out.
I appreciate that, because where I was going to go next was, because I think you wrestled with this on some level too, but speaking for myself, it's easy for me to just get stuck in, oh, everything is a case by case basis, because one of the difficulties with this arena in healthcare is there aren't more established standards. A lot of that is we just don't have enough information. A lot of that is there hasn't been enough research in this stuff, right? Or data provided. And a lot of that's because there hasn't been enough funding of interest on one level or another to do that kind of, those kinds of studies and whatnot. So we're left to our own devices, right? And before, I keep thinking to myself to say this, so let me say it now. One of the things I love most about Mike, so I'm speaking to the audience here, and I say this to patients all the time, right? And it's just that I've said this to you before, not news to you. You are, to my awareness, you are the most networked IEP I know, right? And that's not a negative on anybody else. You spend a lot of effort, a lot of time creating relationships and keeping your foot in multiple different types of communities that have different schools of thought. This community, this is their thinking about mold issues. This community, there's some overlap, but it's not the same. And that's a very difficult place to be, because as humans, it's a lot easier just to say, this is what I know and this is what I'm going to do, and just keep it within my lane so I don't have to like think through everything as a new problem every single time. Yeah. So you straddle this fence, and you just are who you are. So people like you. You're a giver, you share, you collaborate. And so you have an awareness. I tell people, you don't take it the wrong way. I say, I don't know that he knows more than everybody. I don't know that he's smarter than everybody. I just know he has a greater awareness of the entire landscape than anyone else I know. So he brings more to the table with how to think through problems. All right. It's up to you as to how do you create a balance for yourself to keep sustaining that professional work. But so in the end, the complexity of it all is, if I'm in a patient, I'm going like, okay, what's the answer here? What's the algorithm, or what's the process? How do I make decisions? And so you just threw out, so let's start with one extreme side of the spectrum. That is, statistically, most homes don't need that extreme response that you just threw out, that you got to burn it down, tear it down to the studs, throw everything out. Statistically, it's unlikely you fit that bill. Some people might, but statistically, it's unlikely, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So now this is the hard question. So going back to like how much is enough? When is enough? Okay. And I don't know that we're going to come up with an answer today, but I'm going to dare to throw it out there for us to dialogue here. Assuming a given case, a patient, a home, whatever in front of us right now is not in that extreme setting where it is a burn it down, tear it down to the studs, et cetera. Yeah. What's your like bullet point top 3 thoughts on current thinking, or where you think we're going as a body of practitioners collectively, as to how do we determine when enough is enough for cleaning?
Sure. Oh, okay. First thing I'll say, and then we'll go from here, is the goal for virtually everyone, whether they're susceptible or not, is to achieve a status of what we call in our industry, normal fungal ecology. NFE, normal fungal ecology.
First time I heard that term, by the way. Thanks. The acronym.
Yeah. And I probably should just say it out anyway, because no one's going to. Normal fungal ecology on the East Coast, like where you live, is going to look different in your home. Normal meaning what you would have, to clarify, would be what you'd normally have in your house from outside influence, outdoor influence. Your normal fungal ecology is going to look different than my normal fungal ecology in Arizona. It's going to look different in your home in the winter versus the summer. It's going to look different in your home if you have carpeting versus a hard flooring. It's going to look different in your home if you have pets and active lifestyles versus a more sedentary lifestyle, and so forth and so on. But our goal is normal fungal ecology. And to the patient's concerns is what's our action level? I hear you. Trust me, I was desperate for that with
And to
my health.
qualify that, when you say normal fungal ecology, just to clarify, that's as opposed to being mold free.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Because when you say normal fungal ecology, what you're saying is we're trying to establish just what's more baseline or an acceptable, non-inflammatory, provoking environment of level fungus.
And yes. And that last point you made about the inflammatory piece is something I want to segue with you on. Normal fungal ecology is not saying it's normal to have mold growing in your HVAC system. That's not normal fungal ecology. That's an elevated level. It's normal to have mold in your crawl space. That's not, might be normal, might be typical, but that's not necessarily considered to be a normal fungal ecology, especially if that.
I love what you just said right there, because I get patients ask me all the time, is that normal? Is that normal? And I commonly back up. Do you mean normal or do you mean common?
Yeah, common. Yeah.
Common is not normal.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we see, by the way.
Not necessarily normal. Right.
Exactly. And there's another irony within that conversation about how you would think places like more humid, hot, like people like Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, all of these coastal areas, that you would think there would just be ripe with talented professionals who really understand exposure. But what we have found is, just a quick digress, is they're more accepting of it being normal and accepting that as this is what we're going to do. We're not going to recommend any remediation to that. It's just because it's a challenging environment. But back to the topic, I think the issue with normal fungal ecology is that it's not down to a spore. Like I joke with if anybody listening has worked with me before, they might have heard me say, it's not like we know that 14 spores of a certain mold is fine for you and 15 spores, your arm's going to fall off. To illustrate a hyperbole, if you will, but to illustrate this example that it's not that exacting, nor should you feel like your body needs to have that level of exacting, because as inflammation can be affected by many things, including stress. And maybe on a Monday, you're fine with the current level. And on a Tuesday, during your struggle to recover, you might have some symptomatic reaction, not to play doctor, but just we understand that so the question then becomes, you say, what's the goal? What's the expectation? How do we know how much to clean? If we can clean, it does become a little bit of a case by case, in so much that let's talk about what we know about your home. And there's some people that we work with that have done no mold sampling, no idea of what the environment looks like. And they don't have that extreme outlier of burn it down. That's just a normal home with maybe a few water stains here and there, maybe a small water leak. Maybe there's even one area underneath the kitchen sink cabinet that's got some mold on the bottom shelf, but nothing that would warrant an extreme, meaning you have to throw it all away. There's no way that you can salvage the cabinet. The sofa that's in the living room right next to your kitchen, it's porous and it's been contaminated, which is maybe a topic we can get into. And there's these assumptions that are made. And when you listen to the assumptions, which I hope we have opportunities to dive into a bit, they're not based off of science. They're based off of either qualitative observations, like it's there or it's not there, and understanding that. Mark, let me say this one thing. So I always tell people this, isn't it interesting how because some people might be going, my clinician, my ChatGPT search, my friend told me that if I find stack on a sofa, like not growth, but like a spore that's settled, it's a problem. I can't salvage it. And I find this such an interesting topic, because if Stachybotrys or any mold, there's hundreds, thousands of mold, but we're just picking on it because it's the celebrity mold, lands on either one of our t-shirts from the outdoor influence, we don't think twice about it. You go throughout your day, you'll launder your shirt, whether you have a diagnosis or an illness or not. But the second that spore was something that grew, or rather was produced in the home, a lot of people in our community treat it like it's plutonium, in so much that now you don't try to clean your shirt, you have to throw it away. So you can pull me back into the tight conversation that we're having, but our ultimate goal is normal fungal ecology. And some of that's having reference to what would be normal in this home.
So yeah, that's the tough question, right? Is, well, how do we define normal?
Yeah.
You said, hey,
defines outdoor. One way real quick to define that is, what is your outdoor environment? Yeah. There is more to it, as you well know, but one place to start is, what do your outdoor concentrations look like? What's out there?
Yeah. So for me, I'm going to throw this out as a proposition as to, okay, I'm putting myself I'm challenging myself, right? So I'm throwing these questions to you. And they're hard questions, right? You and I both know, I don't know if there are answers to this. Okay. So I'm saying, okay, to be fair to you, Mark, if I'm asking myself that question from the human clinician side anyway, what's my answer going to be? If a patient's asking me, I'm hearing all this is informative, but what's the action point? How do you, if there's no standards and there's no way to gauge and there's no reference point to say what's normal or not, and you're telling me, hey, okay, yeah, I could gauge based on the outside, but hey, Mike, you just said what's normal outside or inside in my home, the same home between the fall and the summer and versus the winter might even differ within the same calendar year. What's normal? Okay. So if I ask myself that, and so I'll propose this to you, you edit for me. If I said, look, I just lost my train of thought there just briefly. If I respond to a patient asking that question, I said, okay, so for me, this is how I approach it with patients. All right. I'm not trying to ask too much of a patient to be the doctor, if you will. And the practitioner, to the human practitioner. I'm not asking the patient to suddenly be an expert and be able to weigh in on that level of experience and familiarity of information, et cetera. But the truth of the matter is there's a good number of unknowns and yet to be learned topics here, but we don't want to wait 10 years before 5 to 10 years before more information is established so that we can make better choices. We got to make the choice now because you're suffering, you're having symptoms. Okay. So we're going to make the best decisions we can.
Yeah.
Some of those decisions are going to come down to one, the resources. Okay. I'll say top 2 decision makers for me. Number 1, and not in rank order. 1 is resources. I've had patients who tell me, and I don't know their financial status, right? I might have some semblance of, they might have alluded to it here and there, but I don't know the details. But they're telling me, if I see our local IEP or they give me a report, if they tell me we got to redo the central air, we got to tear down 2 walls in the basement, we got to take out a wall up there, like we're doing it. All right. Yeah. It's money, but health is wealth, right? Another phrase out there. And we're going to do it. And look, they may not, I'm not holding them to it, holding them to the fire. If they don't actually do it all, but they do 80% of it, then whatever, it's their choice. But that's the initial thought. Okay. They feel like they have enough resources to intend to take a more proactive approach. If someone doesn't have as much resources, I think for me, in context of what you just described here, and again, I think we're on the same page that, what burned me with this question, what the burning fire with this question about when is enough is that I heard and was taught all this stuff about you got to get out of mold, you got to clean out. And I'm not thinking it's like literally mold free, but we're saying it's got to be a drastic change. But I saw patients in my early professional learning and training with this topic. I saw patients get better who didn't have their environment changed, right? They didn't have the resources. They're in a upside down mortgage. They're in a lease. They couldn't get their landlord to do blah, blah, blah. They were too tired or didn't have the bandwidth to take action or just hadn't got around to it, but we treated them and they felt better. And we'd always say, hey, look, there might be a cap to how much better you can be, but we don't know where that cap is per se. I just don't know. The bottom line for me was it's not so binary black and white, like you have to get out or it needs to be 9% mold free. So we don't know the answer, but if you have the resources and you want to be proactive, I would support it.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the resources, it's not like a deal breaker. It's not the end of the world. And we just don't know where you're going to land. So now we're just going to do what we can and we'll see where you land. How does that sit for you?
Yeah. First of all, holistically, I agree. One thing that I wrote down that you just said was cap to how well you can be, alluding to the idea of you only have so much time, money, and energy to address maybe a known identified source of contamination in the home. It becomes a game of triage. And I'm comfortable having this conversation with you. I have my own flaws. And one of the things I worry about is someone will hear this whole podcast and then they'll just focus on this one soundbite about I'm about to bring up. And then that'll be like politics sometimes, how they'll just find the worst point that someone made for the sake of it. So I want to be clear. That's my insecurity disclaimer is, then we triage. Many of the clients I work with, okay, you can't remediate the crawl space. Understood. Let's try to seal it off then. That will cost a tenth, if less, of the cost of that. Oh, we can't do that either. And we really can just afford, we rent a home, so we can't even do much. The landlord has us stuck on a 2-year lease and blah, blah, blah. And bottom line is I want to create as much of a sanctuary with these limitations. As soon as we figure out what those actually are, because one of the things that makes me as effective as I am is the trust earned to dive into their story. Because can they afford it? Or or is it a legitimate thing? Because ultimately, source removal is the number one directive, no matter really what industry you're in. There are some people that don't necessarily do that, but source removal has always been the SOP, standard operating procedure, is to remove that source. When you can't do it, then it becomes an issue of, can we take the bedroom that you spend most of your time in and improve the indoor air quality, environmental quality in there by cleaning it, by cleaning the air, that sort of a thing. But I don't think you're wrong, to your point. I think the reality of it is that through all of it, there's not a guarantee. I tell people not to motivate them because it might not be that motivating, is that you can spend $200,000 in sampling. You're not getting a guarantee that it's going to be enough for you, because you have to be a DNA whisperer of your health and be able to go, oh, 13 spores is fine for you during the winter time, and 17 spores for you is okay in the summertime. And this is real talk. The goal that, you know how you said, we're just going to point in a direction and maybe you're capped with the recovery. I know that's an uncomfortable statement in certain communities, because they don't want you to graduate your health from an F to a C. They want you to graduate from an F to an A.
Yeah.
And I think we all can agree that is the ultimate goal. But the reality of it is that it's not a perfect utopian world, and that you might be an individual where you're at in your journey, you're able to markedly improve your environment and your health with proper treatment, but not necessarily have that textbook poster of what proper remediation, full small particle cleaning might need. And I got to say to that point, Mark, I work with many clients where that is their deal. I'm fortunate when I get to work with individuals that have the income that say, I have the income, my health is more important. Short term, it might feel like an influx in the cost to remediate, but long term, I'm going to spend way more money on treating myself if I don't address this. So you got to think about the short term, not to you, Mark, but to the audience, short term and long term component to this. We just don't know. Now, some people have said, Mike, I hear you. We know that the goal is normal fungal ecology. We know that's a moving target, and really it's a byproduct of where you live. If you live in the woods of North Carolina, your normal fungal ecology is going to look different in your home than it is in Tucson, Arizona, where I reside. But that once we achieve that result, it's not uncommon that we might work with the client to further improve the environments that you might say it's better than normal fungal ecology by way of concentration, the amount of outdoor influence. We're even lowering it now so that you have a better chance to be resilient during your fluctuations of treatment on your road to recovery.
Yeah. So staged or stepped, sequenced.
Thank you. Yeah.
Approach, right?
Yes.
Which
Great.
I love that, because we think about that a lot, and within the boutique practice, especially, but in my office as well. Like it doesn't need to be black and white, like 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. We can break this down into steps. And that's for as you say, the limbic system, that whole mind-body connection and the sort of overwhelm, the anxiety around it all, the PTSD in some cases. It's a lot gentler and easier to think about things step by step instead of like, how do I get from here to here overnight?
And that is overwhelming when people get served up this issue of health of their body and health of their home. It's the equivalent, if you bear with the example, of trying to eat an elephant in one go. And it's like many times part of that deconstruction that you mentioned earlier that I practice with people of what their thoughts are, expectations, is that we break it down into digestible bites, because arguably, and maybe you could validate this claim or observation, is that this person's health probably didn't get to where they're at overnight. And so it might take some time to get back to where you were. Good news is there's a lot of treatment modalities that will probably get you to the finish line that you want to achieve. But to say that you can take one pill, to say that you can do one red light therapy, and I'm joking, I have no context of where red light therapy might play in treatment or recovery, and then the next day you're going to feel 100%, is a fantasy that I wanted. But in my particular case of treatment and recovery was not the case. It took me a number of months to get me back to where I needed to be.
Yeah. And I think tagging on what you were saying, we're clearly not saying, oh, you don't need to clean your environment as an extreme statement. We're not saying that more clean, it doesn't matter than less clean. We're not saying that. We're saying it's not a binary black and white game changing deal breaker if you don't go full out. And we're also saying you can get there. You may not necessarily have the ability, much less need, to do it all in one step. And you don't need to tackle it all at once. It could be done in parts. So we could say, yeah, it would be ideal to be mold free. Maybe we say that it's ideal to be mold free, or not mold free. It's ideal to be as clean as can be, normal fungal ecology, or even better.
Yeah.
Yet it can be done over time.
Yeah.
So if
And
you
some
have the
people-
resources to do it now,
Yep.
great. If you have the resources to do it all in one fell swoop, great. If you don't, it's not a deal breaker. You can get better along the way. It'll just take a little more time, and let's just set our expectations proper.
Yeah. And to your point, yes, said is it goes back to the overwhelm, goes back to the expectation, the anxiety, the worry, all of it, the analysis paralysis is that God help you if you go online and listen to sources that are not necessarily realistic on what we've been talking about would make you feel like if you don't hire a professional and spend $20,000 to $40,000 to environmentally clean your home and your contents, that you quote unquote won't get better. I have news for you. There are plenty of people that have cleaned their house themselves or hired a Molly Maid's type of a cleaning service, if you will, or friends, colleagues to clean at a small fraction of that number, a very digestible number, and seen significant improvements from their pre and post sampling or assessment of the home. They don't know that though, because some folks go online and just feel this need that this is such a thing that I can't do it myself, or I'm trying to keep us honoring on our topic, but there's even other side topics that just further enforces that false assumption, including dealing with mycotoxins and how they can and can't affect you and what they are and aren't as a threat in the environment, short-term versus long-term. There's so much information that's not out there, or not being, because it's out there, not being expressed that much. And it just leads to that overwhelm, and it doesn't need to be that.
Yeah. And then I'll back up and finish off for me, then the second decision-making factor for me with patients is I can't decide this for them. And that is just, how proactive or aggressive do you want to be? So maybe this is a little bit rank order. Number one is, if you don't have the resources to be aggressive in this topic, then that's an automatic rate limiting barrier. But if you have the resources, then if you're a person who, as I like to say, like you're the engineer type, you want to know, I want to do one thing at a time and figure out how that affects me and watch over time. And if you're methodical like that and you want to do one step at a time, then that's one thing. Like who am I to say you got to do it all at one time? Because we're not talking about, it's not an overnight, you're going to die. Okay. Or it's not going to lead to a heart attack or cancer. And we know some of these, we're not flaming anybody here, but we know some of these fungal toxins are carcinogenic or can be carcinogenic, but we call this a chronic illness for a reason. There are some dangers, but overall, statistically speaking, this is not an acute, you're going to end an ER issue for most people.
Yeah.
You and I both know some people who they're sick enough involving mold illness that they end up in the ER recurrently or have some acute issues, no doubt. But as a diversity spectrum of patients and clients who are wrestling with mold illness in a sick building, most people are going to have some degree of time to work through it. That's the thing that we have to be mindful about as practitioners, to help support patients where they're at within their means and within their sort of makeup of philosophy and their healthcare decision-making that is just inherent to their personal individual profile as to how aggressive they want to be. If we really believe, so I'll throw this out there as a qualifier, if we really believe someone's really at that much danger, or they're more likely one of those extreme cases, like this is a tear down project home, okay, then it behooves us to state it as such that, hey, and I've had that case, I'm sure you have too. Hey, we could take this little step by step, but it's so bad, I'm not sure how much difference it's going to make if you only take 1 and 2 steps instead of 8.
Yeah. I've had the privilege, to your point, like if you have the funds, I was going to say aggressive, really what I want to say is assertive. How proactive, maybe there's some like reactive to what's there. And then what can I do? And then we're going to add better filtration to the home and all these things. What happens in my experience when you are one of those types of patients is that you minimize the unknowns, right? Because what you're talking about, Mark, is this idea of how can we sequence it when we have to not marginalize, but do it in a more digestible way that meets the capabilities of the patient. But yet there's more variables. We'll just see what it is. And that's not it's going to be better. It's more of we'll see how it is. And technically you can say that no matter what treatment, because chronic illness is complicated. It doesn't have a test code for many things to help easily diagnose you. It's usually multifactorial and those sorts of things. Here's my point is, when somebody has the funds to do it, and I'm not talking about excessive because me personally, I have issue with companies that offer extremeness for what seems to be no other than a financial gain for themselves. But when it's appropriate, the more that you address, the more variables you remove from the equation of
For
uncertainty.
sure. Yep.
And that's what the push is, to do it the right way. It's not a guarantee. And trust me, for those of you listening, darn it, I could spend 100 grand on my nice home and not have a guarantee. And the answer is you're absolutely right. But you're also that same position if you spent 10,000 or you did whatever. What you clearly are doing is removing the direct threat that started your interaction with the IEP and the clinician in the first place, which was mold exposure. If you're worried about mold exposure and you've removed mold sources in your home and that's your primary place of occupancy, because there's other side effects like how's your workplace and things of that nature, then you've lowered those you've removed as many variables as possible. So it's the convenience of being able to remove as many variables as
Yeah.
possible to give you
Yeah.
more clarity on your journey of treatment and recovery.
Yeah. No, well said. I 100% agree. Yeah. And that's where for me, it's going to come down to, again, cost or slash time, but especially cost. And then what resonates most for the person as to how assertive or passive are they. And for me, if the person's really passive, they probably weren't in this position to begin with because they were not likely to have pursued it. But yeah, it's just matching expectations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll throw out one last thing. I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this on our own, but the conversation I also have tagging on what you just said is that if hypothetically, if someone doesn't even feel that much differently, as you said, not number one, okay, so it wasn't without benefit. Okay. If you cleaned your environment, but you're still wrestling with symptoms, it could be still related to mold illness issues. And we just now need to clean up you having put a barrier and reduced your exposure, but we still need to treat you. Okay. But also, even if we find, hey, we've treated you too, and on paper, like you're a lot cleaner with the mold issues, but as you said, there's a lot of other reasons people could be fatigued, brain fogged, have pain, right? Numbness, tingling, passing out, POTS, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we've reduced or eliminated, nearly eliminated, effectively eliminated that topic variable. We move on. Or we've done something else alongside. We're going to still focus more on that topic now or move on to another topic, whatever. So we've reduced variables. I will further that and say, we're talking about sick patients, but in the same regard, I'm personally convicted in principle, no doubt, that even someone who doesn't have symptoms, when it comes to aging, longevity, and those people, even if they don't have symptoms now, we've now reduced the likelihood, or we've changed the trajectory of their health future by taking that variable out where they aren't apt to develop those problems that they very plausibly would have developed over time with
Yeah.
symptomatology of the same sort as someone else in their family members. Maybe they just didn't have the symptoms now, but they would over time. And then secondly, even aside from that, I'm absolutely convicted that effectively it's anti-aging work. I'll dare say that. And that was actually like the take-home message in the presentation in the conference last fall that we've talked about. Effectively, even on paper, reducing inflammatory provocation through this mold illness, these mold and mold toxins, fungal toxins, et cetera, I argue is still anti-aging work because we're reducing the burden on our immune systems, regardless of whether we have symptoms or not. Any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
No, agreed. More as a student learning, but it resonates with the same sorts of. Is there ever such a thing as healthy inflammation versus excessive? What's the body's design to handle some of these sorts of exposures? But at the end of the day, if you're taxing your body nonstop, is there going to be something? If you drink, if you're a hard drinker, is that going to have downstream effects in 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, or whatever? Same concept with
Yeah,
environmental exposure. So there is a general agreement with
good
that.
analogy. Good analogy.
And one thing that you did say too, I want to talk about it because I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too, is I get this a lot, which is on the topic of, okay, I cleaned and there's an expectation, certainly a desire. And I know firsthand what that desire feels like of, I want to see every day I get better. It's not a roller coaster ride. And you've seen me earlier, we did the whole thing where it's your road to recovery is up here and that's everyone's goal. And on the road to your recovery, it's not a straight line where every day is always better. It might look like this. And there's things that we know from the health perspective that would explain, okay, that's normal. Your body's adjusting. You're going to have off days. And maybe there's things about that journey on the way up that we don't know. I think what I've seen happen is, I know I've seen happen, I just don't know how true it is they'll say, oh, there it is. Did the remediation, did the cleaning, did the testing. I felt good on Monday and Tuesday, woke up on Wednesday, felt bad. There's still a mold problem. And that sort of attachment to something that quick is so overwhelming to the patient that my worry is that if they follow their symptomatology on a day-to-day basis and make rash,
Yeah.
not mindful, but significant decisions, that could make things worse.
Yeah. Overcompensating or
Overcompensating,
overestimating.
overcompensating.
The pendulum swing.
Yeah. Oh, this is a trend, and let's figure it out because I'm glad that you popped the topic first, but there's a lot that we don't know. And God knows, I wish we could say, this is what's happening. And if you eat an olive and a piece of ham, you will get better. If you stay away from this bedroom, if you add this filter, I guarantee you're going to have nothing but upward, onward improvement. We don't know, but what we know is the ballpark we play in. We might know not exactly every position of your health and what it is, but at least we're in the ballpark. And an example of that would be, we know that if you have a mold exposure, our goal is to remove you from the mold exposure. We hope that through proper remediation, proper assessment, proper cleaning, that you're going to remove that variable from the ballpark and thus lower those variables. And that has been a very satisfying thing. I hope in 10 years, we're able to be more exacting than that. But that is one of the limitations that we deal with in your industry and in my industry from the IEP standpoint is nothing is a guarantee. And God knows, I wish that was the case. But the good news of all of it is that there's way more success stories than the reported negative stuff that we commonly see people post. We know the issue that people are more inclined to post and mention and share stories that are negative.
Yeah.
There are plenty of positive stories. And I think that's another issue, Mark, that we see is just people are just taking it all in. They're getting overwhelmed, and it's not that. And these conversations that we're having now and that we're going to have in the future, I hope will provide the proper light and proper hope for people who otherwise are experiencing the latter.
Yeah. No, well said. Yeah, we've gone a while. What do you say? I think we can, this seems like a good stopping point.
Yeah, it was a lot. An hour goes by quick, doesn't it?
It's reflecting a lifetime here. We've talked about a lot. These are not new topics for you and I, right? I don't know that I don't think there was a single base topic we talked about today that's new to you and I. But as we have carved the space here, for me, as we've carved the space to flesh it out in more detail, it's really not only just stimulating and energizing, but it's been educational, but also reinforcing for me. And it's interesting to reflect on the niche details and the minutia of decision-making matters that we've unearthed in our conversations, which is the point of care interface matters between a practitioner and patient, right? And I think for me, I'm just summarizing that our goal with this podcast isn't just to do another podcast, right? Because as you said, as we've said, there's tons of information out there. We don't need to add to the jungle of noise out there. Our goal is, one of our primary goals is to go deeper, bring more value. It's what you and I are about. Bring more value by getting into some of these minutiae issues that aren't so much what we are familiar with or aware of or hear in the space of podcasts, seminars, webinars, online, this and that, education, this and that, because the content is one thing. The application of the content is another thing. And a lot of that application comes down to having more clarity about what matters or what doesn't matter among all the jungle of noise, and specifically what might matter more to me as a individual, as a patient or a practitioner with the patients I tend to see versus another individual as a patient or another practitioner who sees a different type of set of patients.
As was proven out when we had our pregame talk before this started our podcast, the authentic nature of what was to be was that we ended up talking about a foundation, the very foundation that you just described, this idea of, yeah, I want to get into topics about how do we clean these contents and when's enough. I want to get into the topics of mycotoxins more because there's so much good information that will probably be game changing, dare I say life changing for some individuals in a positive way. Want to dive into it, but realizing that if you don't have that foundation of concepts that we just went through today, it might make understanding why we're saying what we're saying a little bit more tricky or confusing. I'm glad we laid the groundwork down for that and can't wait to bring up some of these more niche topics that we're seeing coming up on a regular basis.
So it's awesome. I'm sure that as you and I individually and together reflect on some of the finer points of what we talked about, or just snippets here and there, I'm pretty sure we've opened up many ideas and points of conversation for the futures. Yeah, this for me anyway, this is an awesome first step. And yeah, we did jump right into a more in the weeds topic about cleaning the home when is enough. But this is awesome. Thanks for sharing your time, your expertise, your energy, your presence, your integrity, your value. You, yeah, I love you, and you bring great service and value to humanity, to the communities, that both the practitioners as colleagues of both sides of the coin, human practitioners, house environmental practitioners, as well as your clients. So yeah, I'm definitely with you. Looking forward to where we go from here with subsequent topics, both especially mold illness related and otherwise.
Yeah, I appreciate this platform, Mark, and the opportunity to educate and give back. Really going to get excited here. Can't wait for the next one where we dive into some of these more hot topics.
Yeah. So thanks. We're going to end this here. Thanks for everyone checking in. And yeah, we'll look forward to the next one. For everyone, as a qualifier here, the proverbial sort of liability statement that nothing in this discussion is to be taken as personal medical advice for anyone other than referring folks back to any practitioners that you might be working with. If you don't have a practitioner of whatever sort, whether it's a human practitioner or an IEP practitioner, Mike has his own business, environmental analytics. He has his own podcast called IEP Radio. You can reach him through those means. And for those who could use additional support, help on the clinical side, what might be a second opinion, might be a first opinion. You've never worked with somebody who deals with either mold illnesses issues or in the non-conventional realm. As you already know by now, this podcast is affiliated with an online virtual practice that services the entire country at large virtually. rootseekhealth.com is the website. The practice, the team and I, it would be more than privileged to be of service and support to you if the shoe fits. So yeah, thanks, Mike. We'll talk next time.
Thank you, brother. We'll see you then.
So fresh, just the way you like it.